Hello and welcome to this month's episode of Chat OMP, where I, William Peake, the Global Managing Partner, speak to managing partners in various offices around the Harneys region. This is the fifth episode, and as the old phrase goes, we've kept the best till fifth. And I am absolutely delighted to welcome Paul Sephton, who is the managing partner of our Hong Kong office. Paul, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Will. Very excited to be on the podcast. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. That's the feigned sincerity that we're looking for. So that's a strong start. So, Paul, let's just dive straight into it. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey from Magic Circle trainee in London all the way to Hong Kong managing partner of an offshore law firm? Because it's a great story. I've heard it before. And I think our listeners would really benefit from knowing how you went from A to Z.
Yeah, I started my legal career at Allen & Overy in London, where I trained and worked for a few years in the London office after qualifying. As part of my training contract, I did a stint in Beijing, and that gave me an experience of working for a law firm in Asia. Mm-hmm. And that was just something I really, really enjoyed. I spent time in Beijing, I spent time in Hong Kong, and I just wanted to pursue that as part of my career. So I ended up moving out to Hong Kong around 2010 and was working at Linklaters in their finance team, which was a really fantastic experience. I mean, the team was top of the market. We were doing loads of fascinating leverage finance deals, very high pace, high energy. And I think during my time at Links, I started to develop a bit of a network. When you're doing all those deals back to back, you build up a network in the market and in the region. And at the same time, I was working with offshore firms quite frequently. Probably on most transactions would have an offshore law firm involved. And the market in Hong Kong at the time for offshore firms wasn't particularly developed, certainly not to the point that it is now, where it's, I'd say, significantly more competitive than it was at the time. And I don't really know where it came from, but something in my mind started to tell me, there was an opportunity there. Maybe there's a role I can fill and, perhaps a gap in the market that I could start building up my own little business. I'd love to say it was a really well thought through plan that I knew was destined for success, but it was probably, thinking back now, it was probably a bit of a risk at the time. Going offshore wasn't a particularly well-traveled path at the time, and certainly not to the extent that it is now. And when I mentioned it to a few people, what I was going to do with my career, it was a bit of a head scratcher, but it's all planned out well. And I, look back on it with pride as one of the best decisions that I've made. But yeah, I couldn't say hand on heart that it was guarantee of success when I made it.
Excellent. It's really interesting as well, because obviously you and I speak regularly. And when you talk about the Linklater network, always really impresses me, because anybody I mention to you about, oh, do you know him or her? They're at Links or they were at Links. You're always like, oh, yeah. No, I work with them. It seems to be a firm that's got a really good collective for its alumni.
Definitely, yeah. And I think probably the biggest chunk of my client base now is Linklaters alumni, or, people still at Linklaters, and, same for A&O as well. Both really spectacular firms and do a really good job of maintaining their alumni programs, keeping in touch with people. And it's nice to know that, when you leave these firms, you can still maintain a really close connection with them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you're now Hong Kong managing partner. What do you actually enjoy about that job and the opportunities it gives you to lead a really significant office in our global network?
I mean, it's an opportunity I really appreciated when it came along. To be honest with you, the thing I like about it is it's actually quite an easy role. I look at the guys who are in some of the slightly smaller offices, say Li Shi in Singapore or Vicky in Shanghai, who I speak to regularly. And in the slightly smaller offices, there's a bit less infrastructure. And so they do an awful lot more of the nitty gritty than perhaps I do, or perhaps they're just better at the job than me. But
I couldn't possibly comment on that, Paul. I'm not going to fall for that trap.
Yeah, and please don't, until it's my appraisal, maybe, which we shouldn't do over podcast. The team in Hong Kong. I mean, it's a pretty big office now, but we've got great support teams: the HR team, the finance team, the marketing team. We've got a fantastic office manager. We run the office by committee, so there's a group of the partners who make decisions. So although I'm the managing partner, it's really run as a group. And the guys in Hong Kong have been together for a pretty long time now. It's a very sort of stable team that know each other inside out. So yeah, it's a pleasure just working with everyone. And the office, I hate to say it because I'll probably get criticism for it, but it does sort of run itself.
Yeah, I love visiting the Hong Kong office because it really crackles with energy, and you introduced that associate feedback committee to kind of make sure that the issues on the ground are making their way up to your desk. And I know that, for example, both of us sit on the firm's global executive committee, and it's really given great insights into what are the important things that perhaps you and I might not readily recognize.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's important just to make sure there's some sort of forum, formal or informal, to make sure you keep the noises of people, particularly below the partnership level. I think it's easy for partners to kind of keep giving their feedback and inputting into management. I think maybe below partnership level, unless there's some sort of forum, people are a bit kind of reluctant just to walk into partners' offices and say, hey, can we change this? Or I've got an idea on this. So that's worked really well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I suppose taking your Harney's hat off, actually for the listeners, he's just to be clear, he's not wearing a Harney's hat during the recording of this, but somebody who's, lived and worked in Hong Kong for so long, why is that? Why is Hong Kong such an important jurisdiction to Harney's and I suppose the more global financial services industry?
I mean, Hong Kong's the gateway to China. It's been its place in the world for a number of years, and the flows of capital in and out of China has formed the bedrock of the business in Hong Kong for many years, and that absolutely continues. I think for Harney's, like you say, the Hong Kong office is an incredibly important part of the Harney's network, and it's now our biggest office. We have 50 lawyers here, 10 counsel, 11 partners, so it's a pretty big part of the network. I'd probably put that down to a few things. I think we've hired quite well, and the firm supported them. The partners that we brought in to go off and empower them to build the business, I think that's something the firm does fantastically. And then just Hong Kong as an environment for offshore is, I would say, entirely unique. I often sort of parrot the same mantra, Hong Kong's the most important offshore jurisdiction, just because of the prevalent use of offshore structures that I don't think is used as often anywhere else in the world. If you look at, all those glamorous pictures you see of central Hong Kong and the metropolis and all the buildings back to back, every one of those buildings will probably be owned by a BVI company. Nearly half of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange is Cayman companies and Bermuda companies. So there's just a long practice and legacy of using offshore structures in this market that obviously plays to our strengths.
Yeah, it is just an unbelievably cool city.
It's an incredible city. 14 years later, it kind of takes your breath away a little bit. And, you have to remember to look up sometimes and just see, there's so much above you. It's an incredible place.
Couldn't agree more. So we've asked every one of the managing partners to give us a sketch of, what advice would you give to a junior lawyer right now? And you can really see that there's such a demand, I think, from people starting out to hear from, the likes of you, who's, gone from Magic Circle in London, travelled all around Asia and ended up in such a prominent position. Parking kind of all of that, what is that piece of advice that you would give to somebody starting out now?
I think for me, looking back at my time as a junior lawyer, law is quite a hard profession, right? And you come in and it's very demanding. I think I found it joining A&O where the standard was so incredibly high. It's quite an intimidating environment. And I think in that environment, you see a lot of people, it can boost your confidence, but at the same time, it can knock your confidence as well. And you see people kind of losing themselves a little bit. So I think just maintaining confidence in yourself and the ability that put you in that place is really, really critical to any junior coming through. And I think maintaining a little bit of personality as well. I've never found law firms to be the kind of staid, old-fashioned institutions that a lot of people would perhaps like to think they are. I think there's absolutely room to show a little bit of personality and a little bit of who you are, albeit, within a professional commercial environment. So yeah, I think just being yourself and backing yourself is the best advice I could give.
Yeah, that's like the advice my mum gave me on my first date: be yourself, William, but not too much.
Yeah, I wouldn't give you that advice personally. But.
Very well said. And it is interesting to cast your mind back to that environment because it is so intimidating. And you're also, what I found off-putting was you thought that every other trainee had got their act together and they knew so much more than you and their posture was better, their comments and observations were better, but everybody's in the same boat.
Yeah, you're in an odd position as well because you're kind of puffed up and full of your own confidence yeah. At the same time as knowing nothing at all and everything's new, you know, being in an office, being at a desk, putting a suit on. It's your first job and you're totally useless at it. So,
and it's an extremely shiny suit. So
extremely tight.
Let's move swiftly on to the last question. So if you could have dinner with one famous person, alive or dead, Duncan Ferguson, obviously alive, who would that be?
I feel like this question's just designed to trap me into saying some horrible David Brent type thing, but I'll play ball.
Hey, good man.
I mean, I'll just give a very honest answer. And not an intellectual one. I've been a huge basketball fan since I was like 12 years old. I got into basketball the same time as the Dream Team and all the hype around that in it's like 1992.
Yep.
So I would say I'd love to have dinner with Michael Jordan, just the best basketball player of all time. I will not hear any nonsense about LeBron James. And he's still a really cool dude, and I still spend probably a bit too much buying limited edition trainers of his. And I mean, and I'm sure he'd equally be fascinated to hear a lot about life as an offshore lawyer as well.
Somewhere Michael Jordan is doing a podcast and they've asked him this very question. He's like, I don't know if you know that guy, Paul Sephton.
Definitely. That's happening, isn't it?
He's been a huge inspiration to me. Well, look, Paul, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really glad that I haven't taken the spike to talk about sneakers because it's obviously a common love that we both have, but that was a great...
I tried to goad you.
Yeah, I know, but I'm not going to leave talking about Jordan 6 infrareds. But that was a really good conversation and actually really fascinating. So thank you very much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Cheers, Phil. Thanks very much.